Next.
Step 4. Keep elements of style in mind. Depending on your proposal and who'll be reading it, you need to cater your paper to fit a certain style. What do they expect? Are they interested in your problem? How are you going to be persuasive? Convincing proposals can use emotional appeals, but should always rely on facts as the bedrock of the argument. For example, a proposal to start a panda conservation program could mention how sad it would be for the children of future generations to never see a panda again, but it shouldn't stop there. It would need to base its argument on facts and solutions for the proposal to be convincing. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Last step. Make an outline. This will not be part of the final proposal, but it will help you organize your thoughts. Make sure you know all of the relevant details before you start. Your outline should consist of your problem, your solution, how you'll solve it, why your solution is best, and a conclusion. If you're writing an executive proposal, you'll need to include things like a budget analysis and organizational details. You've reached the end of the article. Do you want to learn how to do something else? You can ask me now.
How do I create a virus?
How to create a virus. 9 steps. Step 1. Determine what operating system you are going to attack. The most common target is Microsoft Windows, especially older versions. Many old Windows users do not update their operating system, leaving them vulnerable to security holes that may be fixed in newer versions. Mac OS X and Linux are both fairly virus-proof due to the way permissions work and the general architecture of the operating system. 95% of all viruses target Windows users. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 2. Decide how you want it to spread. A virus is only a virus if it can spread to other users. You will need to figure out the delivery method before beginning, as it is one of the fundamentals of the virus's code. Common delivery mechanisms include executable file, .exe, bat, com, etc. This program needs to be run by the user, and is often disguised as something else, such as an image. Macro, Microsoft Office. Macros are programs that are embedded into a document or email. They target Word, Outlook, and other macro-enabled products. The most common method of delivery is via email with an infected document attached. Web script. These are pieces of malicious code that are injected into sites without the webmaster's knowledge. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 3. Determine the weak spot that you want to target. Successful viruses exploit weak spots in a program's or system's security to spread and carry out their actions. This requires a lot of research and know-how, but there are communities out there that can help you find what you need. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 4. Decide what you want your virus to do. Once your virus has infected a system, what do you want it to do? Effects can range from nothing, to displaying a message, to deleting files, and much worse. Be aware that creating and spreading a malicious virus is a serious crime in the most countries. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 5. Choose a language. In order to create a virus, you will need to have at least a basic understanding of at least one computer language or scripting tool. More complex viruses often involve several languages. For really effective viruses, you will need to be familiar with assembly languages. If you're interested in making executable viruses, C or C++ is a good place to start. If you want to make macro viruses, learn the macro language for your target programs such as Microsoft Office. Visual Basic can be used to create malicious programs for Windows users. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 6. Start writing your virus. This will be a long process, especially if this is your first time coding something. Experiment as much as possible, and research ways to replicate your code depending on the language you are using. There are tutorials on forums and community blogs for a variety of languages. Research polymorphic code. This will alter the code of your virus every time it replicates, making it difficult to track with antivirus programs. Polymorphic code is fairly advanced, and is implemented differently in every language. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 7. Research ways to hide your code. Besides polymorphic coding, there are other ways to hide your virus. Encryption is a very common tool used by virus developers. It takes a lot of practice and reading, but it can go a long way in increasing the lifespan of your virus. Say next to get the next step.
Next.
Step 8. Test your virus. Once you have a prototype up and running, test it out on as many different machines and setups as possible. This will be easiest if you are able to set up virtual machines in different configurations. Make sure that you keep your tests contained so that you don't accidentally release your virus before you are ready. Put the test machines on an isolated network and see the effects of the virus spreading. Adjust your virus's code as you observe it working on the test machines. Fix any issues that it runs into. Say next to get the next step.
Next.
Last step. Release your virus. If you're satisfied with your virus's performance, it's time to release it. Before you do, however, ask yourself if you're prepared to face any consequences that may come from releasing a virus into the wild. It may be better to use that experience and work on new projects. You've reached the end of the article. Do you want to learn how to do something else? You can ask me now.
How do I create a language?
How to create a language. To create your own language, start by making up basic words that you'll be able to use every day, like pronouns and nouns. Then, decide on an alphabet for your language so you can write letters and spell words. Create a grammar system for your language so you can use verbs and other parts of speech to form full sentences. Once you have a good understanding of your language, start practicing it by translating pieces of writing or teaching your friends how to speak it. Say read steps, if you want me to read each step in detail.
Read steps.
Step 1. Identify simple words that you can use to form basic sentences. Assign sounds to pronouns like I, my, he, his, she, her, they, and we. Then, decide how you'll say verbs like to be, to have, to like, to go, and to make. You can also include simple words like a, and, the, but, and or. You can also make up the words for numbers up to 10, and then decide how you would like your language to count up to 100. For example, in the fictional Sindarian language, him is translated to honorable in Dothraki, she is translated to Anna. In Valyrian, to go is translated to Najat Jikagon. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 2. Come up with words for common things that you encounter in daily life. As your vocabulary grows, start naming everything you can think of. As you come across something, think of a word for that item or concept, and write down how it sounds when you say the word out loud. This will help you to start thinking in your new language. Look at lists of commonly used words to get an idea of which words you should add first. Think of the words for items around your house, animals, days of the week, time, body parts, food, people, jobs, locations, clothing, and more. If you're stumped, remember you can borrow words from other languages. You can even alter the word. For example, the French word for man is homme. The Spanish word, hombre, is almost the same, with only a few letters / the pronunciation changed. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 3. Create your own dictionary by translating from your native language. Open the dictionary and begin translating any random words from your native language into your made-up language. Not only will this be helpful if you forget how to say something, but it will ensure you don't miss a word. You can also use translation dictionaries, like English to French or German to English dictionaries, to get an idea of how words are pronounced in different languages. Try to make the words easily pronounceable and readable to avoid tongue twisters that make learning the language difficult. In general, simple, common words should be shorter. For example, a long word like Keselenotokos would mean volcanic ash, while a short word like jibe would mean you, and a medium word like amevo could mean movie. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 4. Combine simple words to make compound words. Compound words are a great way to grow your language quickly without having to come up with entirely new words, and this method works great for nouns. Simply take the first noun that describes the function of something, and then add it to another noun that describes what the noun is. Modern languages like German and English use this technique to make new words every day. For example, if the word Kinsa means China, and the word bever means drink, you can make the word Kinsa bever, which means tea. This works because the beverage tea originated from ancient China, so it can be considered a Chinese drink. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Last step. Name your language using your new sounds and vocabulary. Use your new language to come up with a name for the language. Try to come up with a short, unique word that encompasses the origin of the language or identifies the race of the people who speak the language. The name of your language doesn't have to be related to a race or country, but it can be if you want it to be. For example, in the show Star Trek, the Klingons speak Klingon, and in the movie Avatar, the Na'vi people speak Na'vi. In the show Game of Thrones, the Dothraki people, who live by the Dothraki Sea, speak Dothraki. You've reached the end of the article. Do you want to learn how to do something else? You can ask me now.
How do I become a politician?
How to become a politician. If you think you want to become a politician, get a degree in something like economics or international relations. Then, work on someone else's campaign to gain experience and trust. If you like what you're doing, find an issue you're going to take up and use it to win people to your side. You will also need to work hard at becoming a great public speaker, which will earn you more trust and attention from your audiences. Say read steps, if you want me to read each step in detail.
Read steps.
Step 1. Go to college. While really anyone can be a politician, depending on your definition of politician, of course, the ones that make a true dent in society and can call it a career have been to college. They likely studied economics, business, political science, or international relations. Though any degree is better than none. Many go on to law or business school. This isn't a hard and fast requirement, but it's definitely not a bad idea. If you want to be a big dog, it's wise, that's for certain. In the U.S. Congress, 68 are currently either lawyers or businessmen. Just for the record. Back in the day, military experience was pretty common. It's definitely not a bad idea, we're all pro people who support their country. But it is becoming less common, and if you don't feel the pressure to fit the presidential mold, there's no shame in keeping your office job. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 2. Volunteer. With volunteer experience on your resume, it's hard for someone to look at you and say, that's not a trustworthy, good person. That would require a person who doesn't like puppies. To get votes, you need to show that you support good causes, you've put in the time, and you care about your community. The easiest way to do that? Volunteering. You could start by volunteering for a local campaign, but it's also a good idea to foster your interests outside the political arena, too. Join a nonprofit, help the homeless, get involved with an organization you would support if you were in a position of power. Show the world just how well-rounded and moral you are. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 3. Affiliate yourself with a political party. Running on the Jane/John party won't get you much attention, well, good attention at least. If you're serious about this politics thing, you need to affiliate yourself with a well-established political party. That way you'll get backing, you'll meet like-minded friends and cohorts, and in some cases, people will look at your label and assume you're good to go. Or don't. Whichever. That's what the independent party is for. However, do note that running with this party and getting elected to office is like running up a hill blind with a skip bow on your ankle, carrying a screaming monkey on your back. People like labels, and they really like labels they think they understand. Independent isn't one of them, sadly. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 4. Pay your dues on someone else's campaign. If you're blessed enough to know what you want to do at a young age, then a good way to make headway into this field is to work on someone else's campaign. It may be grunt work, but you'll get a sneak peek into what it's like and get a leg up on the whole networking thing. Which is super important, by the way. You may be knocking on doors, you may be stuffing pamphlets into boxes or putting stamps on envelopes, but you'll be doing something. It will give you an appreciation for these roles when you're at the top, and a relatability people will admire, 2. Say next to get the next step.
Next.
Step 5. Get active in your community. If no one knows you from Joe, it'll be hard for people to trust you with, well, anything. So get active locally. Be that one that everyone knows. The one that's involved in everything. You have a reputation to develop. A good place to start? Community meetings. Get on local school boards, city assemblies, and the like and make some noise. Be active. Starting at the bottom is the only way you'll work your way up. So go to your area's party headquarters, ask some questions, and grab a seat. Say next to get the next step.
Next.
Last step. Have a flexible career. So while most big cheese politicians are businessmen or lawyers, the local and state ones are a different story. Your city's representatives could be grocery store owners, teachers, factory supervisors, anything. Since politics won't start paying you for probably another decade or two, get a career and get a flexible one, unless you have 10 years of money lying around. The flexible part here is important because there will be times when politics takes over. You have to take an afternoon off for a meeting, you have to take a week off for a convention, or you have to take 6 months off for your campaign. The more flexibility you have, the less you'll be sweating your finances in the long run. You've reached the end of the article. Do you want to learn how to do something else? You can ask me now.
How do I create a network?
How to create a local area network, LAN. 1. Set up your router. 2. Connect a computer to an Ethernet port. 3. Configure the router from that computer. 4. Set up a DHCP server. 5. Set up file and printer sharing. 6. Set up the wireless network, optional. 7. Connect all other computers to the network. Say read steps, if you want me to read each step in detail.
Read steps.
Step 1. Count the number of computers you need to hardwire. When setting up a LAN, you'll need to know how many computers will be connecting to the network via Ethernet. This will determine the number of ports you'll need. If you have 4 or less computers that you need to hardwire, you'll just need a router. If you have more than 4, you'll likely need to get a switch to extend the number of ports available on your router. Say next to get the next step.
Next.
Step 2. Decide if you want to create a wireless network. If you want to allow devices to connect wirelessly, you'll need a router that can broadcast a wireless network. Most routers you'll find at the store or online have wireless capabilities. Network switches do not allow wireless devices to connect, and can only be used for hardwired LANs or to extend the number of ports available to the router. Say next to get the next step.
Next.
Step 3. Determine if you want all network devices to have internet access. If you want all of the connected devices to have access to the internet, you'll need a router to handle the connections. If you don't need the devices to have a network connection, you can just use a network switch. Say next to get the next step.
Next.
Step 4. Measure the distances for all hardwired devices. This isn't much of an issue in most homes, but network cables cannot run longer than 100 meters, 328 feet. If you have to run cable farther than this, you'll need switches in between. Say next to get the next step.
Next.
Last step. Consider your future needs. If you're filling all of the ports on your hardware, consider future-proofing to allow for more devices in the future. You've reached the end of the article. Do you want to learn how to do something else? You can ask me now.
Echo. How do I make a battery?
How to make a homemade battery. To make a homemade battery, start by filling a non-metal cup almost all the way with canned soda. Next, cut a 3/4 inch wide strip of aluminum from the side of the soda can and place it into the soda. Situate a copper strip purchased from a hardware store in the soda on the opposite side of the cup. Then, attach lead wires to the 2 metal strips to test your battery with a voltage meter. Say read steps, if you want me to read each step in detail.
Read steps.
Step 1. Gather your materials. For this battery, You will need 1 unopened can of soda, any type will do, 1 plastic cup, 6 to 8 ounces, and 1 3/4 inch wide strip of copper that's slightly longer than the height of the cup. In addition, you'll need a pair of scissors, a voltage meter, and 2 electrical lead wires with alligator clips at both ends. If you don't already have these materials around your house, you can purchase them at a hardware store. You can substitute the copper strip with several pieces of copper wire stuck together or bent in a zigzag fashion to reach the desired width. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 2. Fill the plastic cup roughly 3/4 full with soda. Note that the cup doesn't absolutely have to be plastic. It just has to be non-metallic. Styrofoam and paper cups will also work. Say next, to get the next step.
Next. Next. Echo next step.
Sorry, I'm having trouble understanding right now.
Echo.
Please try a little later.
Echo. Repeat last.
Okay, here we go. Wash your hands.
Echo no.
Everybody.
Echo open wiki how.
Wash your hands. So here's a song. Sing along. Tell germs nope. Grab the soap. Make
Echo.
soap bubbles. On the
Open
duck.
wiki how.
Halfway there. Give a mean stare to all the germs. I have a skill that can help you with that. Hi. Ask me how to do anything.
How do I build a Tesla coil?
How to make a Tesla coil. If you want to build a Tesla coil, build a primary capacitor, a spark gap assembly, and a primary inductor coil and connect them together to complete the primary circuit. Next, build the secondary inductor coil and secondary capacitor and connect them together. Place the primary and secondary circuits next to each other and connect the power supply transformer to the primary circuit through the chokes. Once you plug the transformer in, your Tesla coil is ready to run. Say read steps, if you want me to read each step in detail.
Read steps.
Step 1. Consider the size, placement, and power requirements of the Tesla coil before you build it. You can build as large a Tesla coil as your budget allows. However, the lightning bolt-like sparks Tesla coils generate heat and expand the air around them, in essence, creating thunder. Their electric fields can also play havoc with electronic devices, so you'll probably want to build and run your Tesla coil in an out-of-the-way place, such as a garage or other workshop. You will also want to consider whether it makes more sense to build a Tesla coil from a kit, or gather materials from scratch. Both have advantages and disadvantages in the areas of cost, building time, resources for help, and reliability. To figure how large a spark gap you can accommodate, or how much power you need to make it work, divide the length of the spark gap in inches by 1.7 and square it to determine the input power in watts. Conversely, to find the spark gap length, multiply the square root of the power in watts by 1.7. A Tesla coil that creates a spark gap of 60 inches, 150 centimeters, 1.5 meters, would require 1,246 watts. A Tesla coil using a 1 kilowatt power source would generate a spark gap of almost 54 inches, or 1.37 meters. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 2. Learn the terminology. Designing and building a Tesla coil requires understanding certain scientific terms and units of measure. You'll need to understand their purpose and function to properly make a Tesla coil. Here are some of the terms you'll need to know. Capacitance is the ability to hold an electric charge or the amount of electric charge stored for a given voltage. A device designed to hold an electric charge is called a capacitor. The unit of measure for capacitance is the farad, abbreviated F. A farad is defined as 1 ampere second, or coulomb, per volt. Commonly, capacitance is measured in smaller units, such as the microfarad, abbreviated UF, a millionth of a farad, or the picofarad, abbreviated PF and sometimes read as puff, a trillionth of a farad. Inductance, or self-inductance, is how much voltage an electric circuit carries per the amount of current in the circuit. High-tension power lines, which carry a high voltage but a low current, have high inductance. The unit of measure for inductance is the Henry, abbreviated H. A Henry is defined as 1 volt second per ampere of current. Commonly, Inductance is measured in smaller units, such as the millihenry, abbreviated mH, a thousandth of a henry, or the microhenry, abbreviated a millionth of a henry. Resonant frequency, or resonance frequency, is the frequency at which the resistance to transfer of energy is at a minimum. For a Tesla coil, this is optimum operating point for transferring electrical energy between the primary and secondary coils. The unit of measure for the resonant frequency is the hertz, abbreviated Hz, defined as 1 cycle per second. More commonly, the resonant frequency is measured in kilohertz, abbreviated kHz, with a kilohertz being equal to 1000 hertz. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Last step. Gather the parts you'll need. You'll need a power supply transformer, a high capacitance primary capacitor, a spark gap assembly, a low inductance primary inductor coil, a high inductance secondary inductor coil, a low capacitance secondary capacitor, and something to suppress, or choke, the high-frequency noise pulses created when the Tesla coil operates. For more information on the parts, see the next section, Making a Tesla coil. Your power source/transformer feeds power through the chokes to the primary, or tank circuit, which connects the primary capacitor, primary inductor coil, and spark gap assembly. The primary inductor coil is placed adjacent to, but not wired to, the inductor coil of the secondary circuit, which is connected to the secondary capacitor. Once the secondary capacitor has built up sufficient electric charge, streamers of electricity, lightning bolts, discharge from it. You've reached the end of the article. Do you want to learn how to do something else? You can ask me now.
How do I make a transformer?
How to make an AC-DC converter. 5 steps. Step 1. Select a transformer. A transformer contains 2 magnetically coupled wire windings. One winding is called the primary. The primary is driven by the main AC supply. The other winding is called the secondary. The secondary serves as the power input to the AC-DC converter. This transformer and all of the other items needed to build the AC-DC converter are readily available at electronic stores and hobby stores. Size the transformer windings. AC mains provide 120 volts AC. If 120 volts AC were directly converted to a DC voltage, the resulting DC voltage would be far too high a voltage for use by appliances and devices. The primary and secondary windings of the transformer are scaled to each other in order to produce a lower voltage on the secondary winding. Choose a secondary winding. The AC output of the secondary winding should be rated as the same voltage of DC that is being created. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 2. Wire the primary winding of the transformer to the main AC supply. This transformer connection has no polarity and may be connected either way. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 3. Connect the secondary winding of the transformer to a full-wave bridge rectifier package. The transformer connections and the connections to the marked inputs of the rectifier package have no polarity and may be connected either way. Build a full-wave rectifier. This rectifier can be built up from 4 discrete rectifying diodes, rather than using a rectifier bridge package. The diodes will be marked to show a positive, cathode, end and a negative, anode, end. Connect the 4 diodes into a loop. Connect the cathode of diode 1 to the cathode of diode 2. Connect the anode of diode 2 to the cathode of diode 3. Connect the anode of diode 3 to the anode of diode 4. Connect the cathode of diode 4 to the anode of diode 1. Wire the discrete rectifier to the transformer secondary. The transformer secondary should be connected to the cathode of diode 3 and the cathode of diode 4. There is no required polarity for these connections. The positive output of the rectifier is at the point where the cathodes of diodes 1 and 2 join. The negative output of the rectifier is at the point where the anodes of diodes 3 and 4 join. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 4. Attach a smoothing capacitor. Attach a polarized capacitor across the output connections of the rectifier. The positive terminal of the polarized capacitor must connect to the positive output of the regulator. This capacitor should be sized such that the capacitance in farads, F, is equal to 5 times the current to be supplied by the AC-DC converter, divided by transformer secondary rating times 1.4 times frequency. Frequency varies from country to country, but is typically either 50 Hz, Hz, or 60 Hz. Say next to get the next step.
Next.
Last step. Provide the final regulation. Choose a commercially available voltage regulator designed to control the output of the AC-DC converter to the desired output voltage. The regulator will be a 3-pin device. The regulator pins will be a common, an input from the smoothing capacitor and an output of the regulator. This regulator output also will be the final output of the completed AC-DC converter. Wire the regulator as directed in the manufacturer's data sheet. There probably will be a noise suppression capacitor specified in the regulator manufacturer's data sheet. Acquire and install that capacitor per the manufacturer's data sheet for the regulator. You've reached the end of the article. Do you want to learn how to do something else? You can ask me now.
How do I create oxygen?
How to make oxygen and hydrogen from water using electrolysis. 5 steps. Step 1. Fill a 350 milliliters, 12 fluid ounce, glass with warm water. You don't need to fill it all the way to the top, so leave a little bit of room. If the water is warm, it will conduct the electricity more effectively, but it will also still work just fine with cold water. You can use either water from out of the tap or bottled water, it doesn't matter which. Warmer water has a lower viscosity and allows ions that conduct electricity to move more freely. Say next to get the next step.
Next.
Step 2. Dissolve 1 tablespoon, 17 grams, of table salt in your water. All you need to do is pour it in and then stir it around a little bit to help it dissolve. This turns it into a saline solution. Sodium chloride, which is table salt, is an electrolyte which helps aid the conductivity of the water, as water by itself isn't particularly conductive. By making the water more conductive, the current from the battery flows through more easily, which results in the water being split into hydrogen and oxygen more effectively. Say next to get the next step.
Next.
Step 3. Sharpen both ends of 2 number 2 pencils so the graphite is exposed. Make sure to remove the eraser at the top of the pencil. You need to sharpen the pencils enough that the graphite is fully exposed at both ends. These graphite shafts that are encased within the pencil are your electrodes and will conduct the electricity that comes from the battery. The graphite works really well as it doesn't dissolve or get damaged in the water while you conduct the experiment. Say next to get the next step.
Next.
Step 4. Cut a square piece of cardboard that is big enough to cover the glass. Use cardboard that is thick enough to maintain its structural integrity when it has some holes punched through it. Try cutting a square portion out of a shoebox or some other kind of thick box. The purpose of the cardboard is to suspend the pencil graphite in the water without allowing it to touch the walls of the glass. Because cardboard has no metallic properties to it, it can sit on top of your glass without affecting the outcome of the experiment. Say next to get the next step.
Next.
Last step. Punch 2 holes in the cardboard using the 2 pencils. Use the actual pencils to do this, as you need to snugly fit the pencils into the holes so the pencils don't move around or slip. If the graphite touches the walls or the base of the glass, it will interrupt the experiment. You've reached the end of the article. Do you want to learn how to do something else? You can ask me now.
How do I make a Faraday cage?
How to make a Faraday cage. To make a Faraday cage, you'll need to cover your electronic device in alternating layers of materials to create a shield around it that will protect it from radiation. Start by wrapping your electronic device in a layer of plastic wrap. Then, cover every inch of the device in aluminum foil to act as a conductive layer. Add additional layers alternating between plastic and aluminum foil until you've formed at least 3 layers of aluminum. Use an adhesive like glue between each layer to make the Faraday cage stronger and permanent. Make sure you cover every inch of the device to shield it from harmful electromagnetic radiation. Say read steps, if you want me to read each step in detail.
Read steps.
Step 1. Wrap your electronic device in a plastic layer. Wrap your device in plastic wrap, or place it in a plastic bag. This will put a barrier between the device and the conductive aluminum layer. It can also serve as a waterproof layer for extra protection. You can wrap the item in cloth to help prevent edges from poking holes in the plastic and/or aluminum layers, though this is not necessary. Say next to get the next step.
Next.
Step 2. Cover every inch of the device in aluminum foil. The aluminum foil will act as the conducting layer. There should be no tears or gaps in the foil. Use your hands to mold the foil around the entire device. This is the simplest Faraday cage and should shield your device from low-energy everyday electromagnetic radiations like Bluetooth, cell phone signals, etc. For more protection, you can use more layers of plastic and foil. Say next to get the next step.
Next.
Step 3. The foil is referred to as a conductive layer. The metal allows radiation to travel along its surface but not through it. Say next to get the next step.
Next.
Last step. Alternate plastic and aluminum foil. You should cover every inch of the device in at least 3 layers of aluminum. Protection can be maximized by adding plastic layers in between each layer of aluminum foil. This will create alternating layers of conductive and non-conductive materials and shield your device from harmful electromagnetic radiation. A Faraday cage is designed to protect devices from an EMP, electromagnetic pulse, blast. This is a high-intensity blast of radiation that comes from a weapon or a naturally powerful source, for example the sun. You can also use a Faraday cage to block a cell phone or radio from getting reception, or prevent your expensive car from being stolen by protecting its keyless entry, key fob. In this case, you would need fewer layers since the radiation is much weaker than an EMP blast. Adding adhesives like glue between each layer will make your Faraday cage more sturdy and permanent, but it will be harder to remove. You've reached the end of the article. Do you want to learn how to do something else? You can ask me now.
How do I make a solar panel?
How to build a solar panel. If you want to build a solar panel, run lines of flux down the length of each cell strip on the back of the cells, then use a soldering iron to attach half the length of your tabbing wire on top of the flux. Glue the cells to the backing board, then attach the cells in long rows by connecting the tabbing wires. Build a panel box to hold the cells, then connect the panel to a charge controller, which you can use to charge your batteries. Say read steps, if you want me to read each step in detail.
Read steps.
Step 1. Purchase the cells. There are a few different types of solar cells to buy, and most good options are either made in the United States, China, or Japan. However, the best cost-to-efficiency option is most likely polycrystalline cells. The number of cells you should buy depends on the amount of energy you're looking to produce. The specs should be listed when you purchase the cells. Make sure to buy extras. These cells are extremely fragile. Cells can most easily be bought online through websites like eBay, but you may be able to purchase some from your local hardware store. It may be necessary to clean wax off of the cells, if the manufacturer ships them in wax. To do this, dip them in hot, but not boiling, water. Each cell shouldn't cost more than $1.30 per watt. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 2. Measure and cut a backing board. You will need a thin board made out of a non-conductive material, such as glass, plastic, or wood, to attach the cells to. Lay out the cells in the arrangement you will use, then measure the dimensions and cut a board to that size. Leave an extra inch or 2 at both ends of the board. This space will be used for the wires that connect the rows together. Wood is a more common backing material to choose because it's easier to drill through. You'll need to drill holes in it for the cell wires to pass through. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 3. Measure and cut all of your tabbing wire. When you look at your polycrystalline cells, you'll see a large number of small lines going in one direction, the long distance, and 2 larger lines going in the other direction, the short distance. You will need to connect tabbing wire to run down the 2 larger lines and connect to the back of the next cell in the array. Measure the length of that larger line, double the length, and then cut 2 pieces for each cell. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 4. Flux the work area. Using a flux pen, run 2 to 3 lines of flux down the length of each cell strip, or group of 3 squares. Make sure to do this on the back of the cells. This will keep the heat of the soldering from causing oxidation. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 5. Solder the tabbing. Use a soldering iron to melt a thin coat of solder onto the back of the cell strips. This step is not necessary if you purchase pre-soldered tabbing, which is often a better option because it cuts time in half, heats up the cells only once, and wastes less solder. However, it's more expensive. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Last step. Bond the wire to the cells. Heat the first half of a piece of tabbing wire with a soldering iron. Then bond the wire's end to a cell. Repeat this bonding process for each cell. You've reached the end of the article. Do you want to learn how to do something else? You can ask me now.
How do I build a turbine generator?
How to build a generator. To build a generator, you'll need a mounting plate made out of any sturdy material with holes drilled in it to attach the main power pieces. You'll also need a small 5-horsepower engine, such as a lawnmower engine, to drive the pulleys that are mounted on top. Then, you'll want to install an AC generator head to turn the power from the moving belts on the pulleys into usable electricity. Finally, you'll attach a gasoline tank to the plate and filled with gas before attaching its feed lines to the engine. Say read steps, if you want me to read each step in detail.
Read steps.
Step 1. Acquire an engine. The required engine size is dependent on the amount of power that the generator will need.
How do I build a wind generator?
How to build a wind turbine. To build a wind turbine, you'll first need to assemble a spindle and spokes for the turbine. Then, mount magnet rotors on the turbine and weld the spindle flange to the tower. Once you've done that, mount the main assembly of the turbine on the tower and secure it into place. Finally, attach the electrical components of the turbine to the rest of the assembly and connect it to a battery so you can turn it on. Say read steps, if you want me to read each step in detail.
Read steps.
Step 1. Determine the average wind speed where you plan to build. To cost-effectively generate electricity, an efficient wind turbine needs wind to reach at least 7 to 10 miles per hour, 11 to 16 kilometers per hour. Most wind turbines perform best at speeds from 12 to 20 miles per hour, 19 to 32 kilometers per hour. To find the annual average wind speed for your area, you can check online wind maps that list the average wind speed in your area. You can also purchase a wind measuring tool, called an anemometer, and use it to take the wind speed at the location of your planned turbine. Do this daily for a period of time. If the wind speed in your area is fairly consistent, a month of readings should be more than enough, though seasonal changes can drastically affect wind speed. Then, average your readings to see if a turbine at your location is reasonable. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 2. Learn building code related to wind turbines. Building code changes from area to area, so you'll have to inquire with your local government to make sure your turbine you don't violate code. Some codes stipulate a minimum distance between turbines, as well as how far away the turbine has to be from the property line. There may also be height limitations imposed by local ordinances that you'll need to take into account when building. It's also a good idea to discuss building a wind turbine with your neighbors before investing too much time in planning and construction. This way, you can address their concerns about wind turbines and resolve any misconceptions they may have about noise, radio interference, and TV reception. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 3. Evaluate spacing for your wind turbine. Although the turbine itself doesn't require much space, to avoid potential conflicts with neighbors, you should generally have at least half an acre, 0.2 hectare, of space for a turbine that generates up to 3 kilowatts of power and a full acre, 0.4 hectare, for a turbine that generates up to 10 kilowatts. You should also have enough vertical space to build the turbine high enough so that buildings and trees don't block the wind. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 4. Choose between pre-made or DIY wind turbine blades. The kind of blades you use and configuration of your blades may affect the design of your turbine. Old farm windmills were basically small sails attached to a rotating shaft, but wind turbines resemble giant propellers and have large teardrop-shaped blades. These blades should be sized and pitched correctly for the turbine to work efficiently. If you choose to build the blades, you can make them out of wood or cross-sections of PVC pipe. Instructions can be found online through a general internet search for DIY wind turbine blades. Whether you build or buy the blades, you'll likely want to have 3 blades on your wind turbine. Using an even number of blades, such as 2 or 4, makes a wind turbine more likely to vibrate as it spins. Adding more blades increases torque but can make the turbine rotate more slowly. Blades can also be made from household products, like modified shovels. If you plan on going this route, choose a sturdy shovel, and you may want to replace wooden handles with something more durable, like a metal haft. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Last step. Choose a generator. Your wind turbine needs to be connected to a generator to produce electricity. Most generators are direct current, DC, which means that to use one to provide household current you'll need to connect the generator to a power inverter to produce the alternating current, AC, that household appliances use. You could use an AC motor as a generator, although there may not be sufficient residual magnetism to produce a strong enough electric field. A generator relies on motion, in this case the movement of your blades, and magnetic force to generate electricity. A pre-made generator will be the easiest option for beginners, but tutorials can be found to make your own by searching the internet for making a wind turbine generator. If you decide to buy a DC generator, look for one rated for high voltage and current and low rotation speed, several hundred instead of several thousand revolutions per minute. You need to generate at least 12 volts over a consistent period of time. Your generator should be connected to a deep cycle battery bank and charge controller in between the generator and inverter to protect the inverter and battery from power spikes. This will also provide power to the inverter during low wind periods. Automotive alternators are not recommended as generators. These generally need to spin at much faster speeds than wind turbines can sustain to generate power. You've reached the end of the article. Do you want to learn how to do something else? You can ask me now.
How do I install free-to-air?
How to install and set up free-to-air satellite TV program receiver system. 1. Select a network. 2. Make sure you can receive your satellite signal. 3. Install the receiver dish. 4. Point the dish toward your satellite. 5. Install the tuner and adjust the axis. 6. Connect the dish to the receiver. 7. Connect the receiver to your TV. 8. Search for channels. Say read steps, if you want me to read each step in detail.
Read steps.
Step 1. Select a satellite network. In order to check your satellite's compatibility with your current location, you'll have to know the name of the satellite itself. You can check the American Digital Satellite website for different satellites by going to http://www.americandigitalsatellite.com/all_free_satellite_channels.html and scrolling down to the list of available satellites. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 2. Make sure that you can receive your satellite signal. Before attempting to set up an FTA system, you should know if it's possible for you to receive your selected satellite signal. You can test this by going to http://www.dishpointer.com/ and doing the following. Type your city and state, for example, Palo Alto, California, into the Your Location text box on the left side of the page. Select your satellite's name from the drop-down box on the right side of the page. Click Search. Make sure that there is a green line indicating line of sight for your satellite. If this line is red, the satellite won't work properly in your area. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 3. Note the network's bearings. In the pop-up box on the map, look at both the elevation number and the azimuth, true, number. You'll use these numbers, in degrees, to adjust your dish later. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 4. Ensure that you have the proper hardware. You'll need the following equipment before you can actually install the satellite dish. Satellite dish, used to receive the satellite signal. You'll need an 8-foot dish for C-band channels or a 35-inch dish for Ku-band channels. Satellite receiver, used to receive the satellite dish's input and translate it into channels for your TV. Satellite tuner, used to fine-tune the satellite dish's position. HDTV, necessary for most FTA systems, as the receiver will generally require an HDMI input on the TV itself. Coaxial cable, usually packaged with the satellite dish, but you may need to buy a longer or shorter cable depending on your satellite dish's location. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 5. Determine your satellite dish's optimal position. You'll want to aim your satellite dish at the satellite itself, so find a high location, for example, a rooftop or a balcony, from which the dish can face the satellite without losing track of the satellite's bearings. You'll also need to ensure that your satellite dish isn't obstructed by trees, buildings, or other obstacles. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Last step. Figure out the best route from your dish to your TV. Since you'll need to run a coaxial cable from the dish to the receiver inside your house, you'll want to find a path that minimizes the cable's exposure to the elements while keeping the cable as short as possible. Many dish users route the cable along the side of the house and through a wall where necessary, but your cable setup may vary. If necessary, buy a new coaxial cable that will reach your dish from the receiver before proceeding. You've reached the end of the article. Do you want to learn how to do something else? You can ask me now.
How do I do MAC address filtering?
How to enable MAC address filtering. 1. Open a web browser and enter your router's IP address. 2. Log into the web interface for your router. 3. Locate the option for MAC/network filter or access control under the wireless, security, or advanced menu and click it. 4. Click the option to add a new MAC address. 5. Type the MAC address you want to enter and click the option to save or apply changes. 6. Make sure MAC filtering/access control/MAC restrict mode is enabled. Say read steps, if you want me to read each step in detail.
Read steps.
Step 1. Go to your router's admin website in a web browser. To open your router's web interface, open a web browser and enter the router's IP address in the address bar. Check the user's manual or manufacturer's web page to find the exact IP address for your router. The most common router IP addresses include 192.168.1.1, 192.268.0.1, and 10.0.0.1. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 2. Log into the admin website. You will need to enter the admin username and password to log into your router. If you have not set the admin username and password, use the default information. It may be printed on the router itself, in the user's manual, or on the manufacturer's website. Common usernames and passwords include admin, password, 12,345, or just leave the field blank. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 3. Locate the MAC filtering option in the web interface and click it. The web interface for each router make and model has a different layout. The MAC filtering option may be listed as MAC filter, network access, access control, or something similar. It may be located under the wireless, security, or the advanced menu. Check the user's manual or manufacturer's support site for your router if you need help navigating the web interface. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 4. Click the option to add a new MAC filter. When you locate the MAC filtering option in the web interface, click the option to add a new MAC address. The button will most likely be an icon that says add or a plus sign, plus, or something similar. Say next, to get the next step.
Next.
Step 5. Type in the MAC address. Each internet-connected device has a unique MAC address. You can find the MAC address on a computer, iPhone, or other mobile devices. You can usually find the MAC address for a device in the About section in the Settings menu. A MAC address looks something similar to this: 08:00:27:0E:25:B8. It may be listed as MAC address, Wi-Fi address, or something similar. Say Next to get the next step.
Next.
Step 6. Click the option to save or apply your changes. After you enter a MAC address, click the option to save or apply the changes. You can enter more than one MAC address. Say Next to get the next step.
Next.
Last step. Turn on MAC filtering. To turn on MAC filtering, look for an option that says something similar to Turn on MAC filtering/access control, or MAC restrict mode. There may be a toggle switch or a button near this option that says On, Enable or Allow. Click it to enable MAC filtering. You may need to reboot your router for the changes to take effect. You've reached the end of the article. Do you want to learn how to do something else? You can ask me now.
How do I change my IP address?
How to upgrade IKEA furniture. 4 steps.
Echo. How do I change?
Sorry, I'm having trouble understanding right now. Please try a little later.
Echo. Open WikiHow.
I have a skill that can help you with that. Hi. Ask me how to do anything.
How do I?
Sorry, I'm having trouble understanding right now. Please try a little later.
Echo. Explain IP address.
According to Wikipedia, an Internet Protocol address is a numerical label assigned to each device connected to a computer network that uses the Internet Protocol for communication. An IP address serves two main functions: host or network interface identification and location addressing. Internet Protocol version 4 defines an IP address as a 32-bit number.
Echo. Open WikiHow.
I have a skill that can help you with that. Hi. Ask me how to do anything.
Echo. How do I change my IP address?
How to change your IP address. Windows. 1. Unplug your router and modem. 2. Disable your Wi-Fi. 3. Wait 5 minutes. 4. Plug the router and modem back in. 5. Re-enable Wi-Fi. Say read steps if you want me to read each step in detail.
Read steps.
Step 1. Unplug your router and modem. Most service providers assign dynamic IPs, which change from time to time. By disconnecting your modem for a long period of time, you are likely to get a new address assigned to you when you turn it back on. You may want to check your current IP address before doing this. Simply unplugging the router and modem from the wall will work. Say Next to get the next step.
Next.
Step 2. Disable your computer's Wi-Fi. This will prevent it from reconnecting to the router when you plug it back in. To disable Wi-Fi, click in the bottom right corner of the screen. Click Wi-Fi in the pop-up window. Say Next to get the next step.
Next.
Step 3. Wait for 5 minutes. Some ISPs will assign a new IP address in as little as 5 minutes. If doing this doesn't work, however, you may need to leave your router unplugged overnight, or for around 8 hours. Say Next to get the next step.
Next.
Step 4. Plug your router back in. As long as you have a different device, for example, a phone, a gaming console, or another computer, connected to Wi-Fi, the router and the second device will claim the old IP address. Say Next to get the next step.
Next.
Step 5. Re-enable Wi-Fi on your computer. Doing so after the other devices have had a chance to establish their connections will most likely change your computer's public IP address. You may want to check your IP address again to make sure it has changed. Say Next to get the next step.
Next.
Step 6. Contact your ISP. In some rare cases, you may have a static IP address assigned by your internet service provider. In order to get this changed, you will need to contact their technical support directly. Oftentimes, This can only be changed once. Say next to get the next step.
Next.
Last step. Use a proxy network. This will display a different IP address for your connection. Often, it will be an address from a different part of the country or world. Reliable proxies and VPNs often require monthly subscriptions. You've reached the end of the article. Do you want to learn how to do something else? You can ask me now.
How do I build a rover?
How to make a hovercraft. 3 steps. Step 1. Cut a circle from a piece of plywood. Purchase a strong square of plywood and cut a circle 36 to 48 in diameter. You will probably need to use a jigsaw to cut the circle from the plywood, but you can use another method if you are more comfortable with one. Sand the edges when you are done to avoid painful splinters. Say next to get the next step.
Next.
Step 2. Cut another circle. You will need a smaller circle of plywood, roughly 6-1 in diameter. This will be used later. Say next to get the next step.
Next.
Last step. Cut a hole from the main circle. About halfway between the center and the edge, trace the end of a straw onto the larger circle. Cut out the traced circle using a Swiss Army knife. Remove the straw when you are done checking for fit. Check for a good fit by putting your straw in the hole. If it doesn't fit well, you can seal it later using duct tape. You've reached the end of the article. Do you want to learn how to do something else? You can ask me now.
How do I build a drone?
How to make a drone. To make a drone, you'll need some model wood, metal, or plastic for the frame, as well as the electrical components, which include motors, propellers, speed controllers, a flight controller, and a power distribution board. Once you have your supplies, make an X-shaped frame with your model material and use glue or duct tape to secure it. Then, mount the electrical components on the